What would your father say if he were to look down on the unrest in Baltimore? Just a simple question.
Well, I think we always have to be cognizant of the fact that my father always encouraged us as we protest and to demonstrate that we do it on the high plane of dignity and discipline. It's no secret that violence never resolves or solves any issue. In fact, it exacerbates it. But he would also say to us that rioting, I mean, he's the one that coined the phrase rioting, is the language of the unheard. And so what we're experiencing, I think, are the disillusionment of so many people because of the socioeconomic climate that we live in America now. And we have not paid enough attention and really thought about intently how do we really begin to upgrade and elevate and empower people in our nation, especially a younger generation, because many of those in Baltimore, there's a high rate of unemployment among youth all around our nation, and particularly in the African American community, but also there are many college graduates now who are leaving with a degree and can't find a job. So America almost has to push the reset button, because if not, I think we're going to continue to see more and more of this, because it is a sign of our inability or ineptness as relates to realizing that every American is critical to our success. And, you know, Daddy called it the moving toward the beloved community and realizing the dignity, the worth, and the value of all of humankind. And one man's death diminishes me. And so if I have a member of my human family who is suffering because of unemployment, if someone is suffering because of other social inequities, then we all have a responsibility in some form or fashion to really put on our thinking caps, and more importantly, I think we have to start going within our spirits and saying, what can we do to change the conditions for the marginalized, those that feel outside of the system, and particularly African American men now, who I can't even imagine as a female. I have no idea how it feels to be a black man in America today, with what's been happening with many of our unarmed African American men in law enforcement. We've really got to look at how do we really redevelop a real relationship between law enforcement and the community. And one of the things that we do in our nonviolence 365 education and training is to try to bring every member of the community together, including law enforcement, to try to create a process and an understanding by which everyone can function together to preserve, protect, and uplift and advance the community.
Or will you channel those energies in that direction so that you, at least in our community, bring together folks? And speaking, you could speak nationally as well on that. Yeah.
Well, I'm in prayer about that because we're at a serious place, I believe. I'm really concerned that this is just the tip of the iceberg from St. Louis, Ferguson to now Baltimore for our nation. And so I'm in prayer about the best approach. I mean, there are some discussions about connecting with different members in the metropolitan area here in Atlanta, because I really believe it's important that we create a proactive agenda so that we're not always reacting. Because when we're proactive, as I was listening to the news earlier, the thing that's sad is that there's not a strong contingency of leaders who have their hand on the pulse of the communities. So there's a disconnect with just the plain, everyday community person and what supposedly are leaders in the community. And that has to change. That means there has to be more of the community feeling like there is a group of leaders here on a daily basis, even if it's not a specific leader every day, but the leadership agenda is present every day, and they're there, at different moments, and that they're represented at different times, so that as these things happen, the people rally together because that leadership has always been present. Not here and there, but consistently.
We approach that because I've been to many a story where the police department and community leaders, they come together and it followed Ferguson. Have we done enough of that? Do we need to do more of that locally?
I think we always have to do it more locally. I think it needs to be second nature. It doesn't need to be an afterthought. It needs to be embedded in who we are and how we run our communities and how we run our cities.
What do you want to say from that position as far as if you had any advice to the folks with the badges and the guns, what would that be?
I don't know. I've never been in law enforcement. Yeah. I would dare try to imagine what it is to wake up every morning to go serve and protect. And in some instances, your life is constantly under threat. But what I can say is that what helps it is when you have a certain orientation in life, a certain philosophy approaching life. It can help to better direct some of that fear. My father obviously had to face threats constantly. He never carried a weapon. His weapon was unconditional love. His weapon was forgiveness. And, it's something about that kind of spirit that you have to carry into a day. Doesn't mean lives won't be lost. He was assassinated. But the reality is that to me, I think we have to get to a place in the nation where we just understand the value of our life. I say this constantly. We know that there are probably more whites that are being killed by police officers. We don't hear about it. So I wonder what the agenda is that we have now highlighted the number of African American men killed by police officers as if it's not happening in other places. I just can't believe that that's not happening. I do know alternatively, though, and I've spoken to this, that we got to look at in the training of an officer. In most instances, the image that they're shooting at is like a silhouette of a human being, and that image is black. And so if that's what's embedded in my training when I'm shooting, then when I'm facing an African American figure, I'm going to be more apt to pull the trigger, repeatedly, especially if the adrenaline is rushing. And so we may need to look at, maybe we need to change these targets. But also in our nonviolence education and training, teaching people about the beloved community, and as we begin to look at ourselves through the lens of Dr. King's philosophy and methodology, it transforms how we approach people, how we engage community on an everyday basis, and how community sees us. Because right now what's happening is people in the black community, at least, and I won't say all people because it's not true of every African American, but there are individuals in the black community who see law enforcement as an enemy. That all they're out to do is to kill us. They don't care about us, and so we need to arm. Some people are saying that. I don't agree with that. But what the philosophy does is to teach us how to even help them to see us not as an enemy, but as a friend.
You mean law enforcement?
Yes, right, and vice versa, if that be the case with law enforcement.
How do we get there?
We have to go through it. I mean, it's not a magic wand. People have to be willing to go through something that they haven't been through before.
Are we going through that now?
No, because I'm inviting people to come to this nonviolence education and training. In fact, we're going to invite more and more law enforcement, but it's up to them to it's different than the training they've received. I can't explain it to anybody, but
when does that happen here?
It would have to be something specially done right now, when you start talking about groups of them. But, we had some of them in our training in Ferguson. It was a very powerful experience. I haven't had an opportunity, and I do want to follow up with some of those officers that were involved there to see, how it has shaped the way that they do law enforcement now, because we want to know that. One of our major trainers was a former captain in the St. Louis Police Force, and it really has transformed him. And so we don't do the training directly. He does it because he knows their world,
What can this center do to?
Yes, I mean, our primary focus is nonviolence 365. And the reason we call it 365 is because Daddy saw it as a lifestyle, not just as a tactic to be used in a protest movement, but how do we engage, how do we see people, first of all? How do we engage people? How do we relate to people? The communication, even when we disagree. I didn't like the fact that, people were saying, like when we were in Ferguson, I heard F the police. If you mix that in a protest, you have turned it into a violent protest, but we don't think it's violent because we didn't hurl a brick, or a bottle. Right. But if you use your tongue that way, you're violent as well. Yeah. So we don't divorce it. It's all violence. So we just teach how do you do this with the kind of dignity that we saw John Lewis on that bridge, who went toward law enforcement in a very disciplined manner, never struck out with his tongue, never struck out with his hands, and with that dignity. And even though it happened, years later, here's a man who serves. I mean, I'm fighting for the right to vote. I wasn't just out there expressing my anger with a system, but I allowed my body, my mind, and my soul and spirit to be utilized to transform a system that I now serve in Congress under a first African-American president. So the question comes back to, what is the agenda, what is the goal, and what is the purpose? Because if we just want to react for reaction's sake, then don't expect any change. And this is a long road. Change does not come overnight, and I think that's the frustration. It's like, can this stop? Well, the question is, do we have the discipline enough to be able to endure the process to the change? Because if we do, the change will come.